Okay, so you dropped this graph today where you said for yesterday I was looking for a couple specific graphs of blank data, and I was able to find what I was looking for. However, I had the access to the raw data, so I decided to go ahead and visualize some data for myself. And he says, first comparison I wanted to see was confirmed daily cases slash deaths
Over
at
death.
scale. Okay, so I'm going to pull this first graphic up. So explain to me, what are we looking at?
Well, first this started actually with the dialogue you and I had reacting to a similar graph somebody had shared of the total cases for Texas, Arizona, and Florida over daily deaths at scale. And we were like, oh, this is actually pretty interesting. Like this challenges some of the kind of reasonability of some of the hype that's been put on the alarming, like, rising cases. That's like the thing that everybody's talking about.
Right.
And we both mentioned, like, hey, it would be interesting to see this same comparison on a national scale and a global scale. So I went to go look for that data and I just couldn't find it. But then I just went to the Worldometer's site that tracks all of these things, kind of a comprehensive database. And I was like, well, I have the data and I've been learning kind of some data science myself in my spare time. So I'm like, you know what? Why not? I'll spend half an hour and just put this visualization together myself.
Okay, and so we're looking at, you put together a couple different graphs. Specifically, there's one here about the number of daily deaths, the number of daily cases versus the number of daily deaths.
Right. So this is the new cases and deaths reported every single day. It's not the cumulative total. This is just every day what's being added to the total. So
right.
Yeah.
So the peak of the deaths here was right around late April, early May. This little hold on, they can't see that. Let me make this smaller. Hold up real quick. This little part right here, which is early May. And then this is what everybody's freaking out about, right? After people started going outside, doing barbecues, so on and so forth, we saw the spikes in new cases go way up. However, it seems here that the deaths have not gone up.
Right. I mean, there is some fluctuation, and especially, I mean, if you look at the United States graph, comprehensive for these states, you see the highest peak in the number of daily deaths when, New Jersey and New York were just having the worst of it. And as total cases have increased, total deaths have also increased, but putting it to scale and putting it in perspective, it's pretty shocking to me how little relationship that the total deaths actually seem to do with the total cases. And that's just taking the deaths at face value and assuming that none of these are mislabeled, that none of these are, compounding issues with other types of comorbidities. I mean, they all have comorbidities, but, assuming that the thing that shall not be named is actually the driving component in that metric.
Yeah. So am I reading this correctly? Because it looks like from this graphic, which everybody was like, hey, you got to wait until after 2 weeks after, right, to see if there's a spike in deaths because there's a spike in cases. So here we are, weeks and weeks after summer starting, weeks and weeks after the protest. And am I reading this correctly that the cases look like they went way up? What is this number on the far left? This says 8,000. Is this daily new cases? 8,000? 80,000 daily new cases. But it looks like the mortality rate has stayed relatively the same or better since this late April, early May peak.
Right now we're about 1,300 cumulative deaths a day. I think the peak, I think it was around like 2,000. And we got it as low as like 600 deaths a day. So it has been creeping back up. But yeah, I mean, like in proportion to the cases, it's pretty staggering. And I remember initially, on Twitter, I was talking to some people about the relationships between cases and deaths, and seeing that it just didn't seem square. And a lot of people rebutted it and were saying, well, the cases go, 2 to 3 weeks ahead of the deaths, because people take time to get sick and die. And, I was like, okay, yeah, I mean, like, I realized that that's a possibility, and I kind of factored that in. I was like, well, let's see. But the relationship just is not, it's certainly not one-to-one. There is some relationship, but I think, so this is where the next graphs that I prepared, that this is really kind of putting some things into perspective, because I think a lot of people are looking at the rising death numbers and the rising case numbers, and a lot of people are saying, well, we need to do another lockdown, as if the first phase of lockdowns were particularly effective, right? So, I'm not doing any of this to underscore, 1,300 people dying a day. That's a lot of people. It's not as much as heart disease, is not as much as cancer, but it's certainly a lot more than
Still
the
a lot
flu.
of people. Yeah.
It's a lot more than, I mean, it turns it into one of the top 10 overall causes of death in the country. So that's very significant. But when we're talking about how to address that, lockdowns in particular, they have other ramifications.
Right.
They don't exist in a bubble. And, one thing that people have been speculating upon is like, how much increase in deaths of despair are the lockdowns themselves having? Right. The economic consequences that are absolutely catastrophic. And we have not even begun to see the tip top of the iceberg of what, no pun intended, of what the effects of the economic side, but, the auxiliary stress, the suicides, the drug addictions, all that type of stuff. So this is where there is a little bit of speculation, because statistics on like suicides and stuff, they lag about 2 years, so the most recent comprehensive annual statistics you can find for 2018. But I found a pretty substantial study from a group called, I think, the Well-Being Group. And basically what they've tried to do is they've tried to build a model to predict and chart what they anticipate the increase will be because of the thing that shall not be named. So what they do is they take all these factors like unemployment and poverty and all these types of things, and try to tie relationships from indicators in the past to past trends in suicide, drug addiction, deaths of despair, and then chart those on a metric comparable to what we can track with unemployment and all these types of things now, to try to like put a ballpark of where they think this is going to happen in real time. So that's if you go to the graph that's labeled USA daily deaths by age group, this is something that I wanted to try to put those deaths in perspective with policy prescriptions.
Hold on, USA, by death group. Okay, yep.
By age group. So a couple things to notice on this. So I broke down the total daily deaths in proportion to the age demographics that are experiencing it. So if you look at the top curve, that's the total amount of deaths, right? Then if you look at the next line down, the yellow, that's actually the deaths under 80 years old.
Okay.
So right off the bat, if you look at people under the age of 80, we're talking almost cutting it in half.
Wow. Okay.
Right. So then you see another line down there. It's a red line. And that's the amount of deaths for people under the age of 60.
Okay.
Okay. And then there's a microscopic little blue line down there that you can barely even registers, and that's deaths under 40.
Wow.
So almost non-existent.
Right.
Almost statistically non-existent. And, the deaths under 60 is still, that is a far cry. So to put that death under 60 in perspective, I took the projected increase from the well-being study, and then I annualized that. So I took, I believe it was like they were anticipating somewhere in the ballpark of like 65,000 additional deaths of despair. Jeez. This is on top of the normal predicted death of despair, which has been rising year over year over year for like the last 20 years, right?
Deaths of despair, we're talking suicide?
We're talking about suicide. We're talking about drug overdoses. Okay. We're talking about people that also just get into self-deprecating ruts in their lifestyle, and they just let their weight go to nothing, they just get overwhelmed, and they die of preventable things essentially attached to despair one way or another, right? So I took that projected total, and then I divided that by the amount of days in the year since the thing that shall not be named started, right? And then that gives you a constant of that. It's that straight line going across the graph. So
is it that, do I need to pull up a different graph right now?
No. That graph that you're looking at right now. See the orange line?
Oh, yes.
And it's just going straight. So that's just taking that yearly projection and then just dividing it by days. Because I don't know how it's going to fluctuate month by month or anything like that.
Sure.
But so the interesting thing with the deaths of despair, that's also adjusted for age. So I adjusted that deaths of despair figure for people under the age of 60. So if you're talking about the majority of Americans that are under the age of 60, legitimately the cure for this phenomenon, if we're talking about the implications of lockdowns, if we're talking about the implications of economic collapse, they're already worse than the disease itself.
If you're under 60.
Under 60.
Wow.
Correct. And that's not to minimize people that are over 60, but we need to also be sober-minded when we're looking at that thing, because realistically, if you're looking at somebody that's over the age of 80, for example, there's a high probability that that person's not making it through the year anyway. So it's like, it really gives me cause. I'm like, wow. I mean, like,
so let me, I want to go back to some of these graphics in a second. By the way, guys, if you're watching this live, give this video a thumbs up. It's probably going to get demonetized because we're talking about the thing we shouldn't be talking about on YouTube. But I got my man Mogli here. He put together some really interesting charts. I'm gonna kind of ask him specific questions, but thumbs up really helps before we get into anything else. So let me go back. So this chart, where is it? I think it's this chart. So we'll just look at the U.S.
Yeah.
Shouldn't this chart, and we're still talking about, like you said, 1,000 people dying a day. That's awful, right? But shouldn't this chart bring a ton of us excitement and hope to say, hey, look, when this thing first hit in parts of New York and was really bad, hospitals were overturned, the death rate was really, 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 really high. And that's really, really, really bad. However, we got more testing out. We got potentially more younger people that are getting this thing, right? Because maybe they're not social distancing. And the number now is up here of new cases, right? Which is a lot. And this number is still, doesn't look like it's higher than it was at the peak when this is late April, early May. Is that a fair?
It's substantially less high than the peak.
So it's less higher than the daily peak of death.
Where we're talking about like 60% of the peak.
Yeah, 60% of the so 60% of the peak of death in late April, early May is where we are now, while the blue is the new cases. So to me, this would be good news. This would be like, yo, this thing isn't as deadly as we initially thought. This thing isn't as deadly as, everybody projected. It is good news based on the amount. And granted, you can say, well, we got more effective at treating it. We were more prepared because of social distancing.
And I think the other
there's
side
more younger people getting it, right? So you could say all those things,
right?
But
I think still, another side to that is that when we were looking at the peak of daily death, I mean, like this is it's something that's a hot button issue right now. But I think a lot of people are dancing around it. I think that because if you factor out New Jersey and New York from that data, this is a completely different picture. Like if you factor out New York and New Jersey from the data for the United States, even the way the United States ranks globally, like it totally changes. And I think that even comparing countries is probably more accurate to compare data in the United States to compare in Europe as a whole, which in that case we're actually still doing better than Europe as a whole. But many
When you
states,
compare
like,
populations per capita, we're still doing
right,
better than Europe
when
as
you look
well.
at the per capita because really it's like more accurate to compare individual states in the United States to individual countries within Europe, right? And it actually, it's like states like my state, Tennessee, like a lot of people are like, hey, like this is a red state and they think the virus is made up and that's why it's so terrible. But we're actually doing better than Finland. We're doing better than Germany. So it's like people just aren't being super consistent with those comparisons. But I think you have to contribute a lot of that high daily death rate just to catastrophic policy failure in a handful of states from a handful of governors and bureaucrats. I mean, they were literally sending COVID positive people to nursing homes with the most vulnerable population.
Right.
And you had over 60% of the deaths in those states occurring in nursing homes.
Yeah.
It's
crazy.
That's unbelievable.
Yeah. So obviously there's some breakdowns that have happened from a bureaucratic level. Here's my thing. And I'm going to assume intent here, and I seldom do I assume intent.
Yeah.
However, so we're in California. They issued another lockdown. The beaches are still open, which is still cool. We're still going to the beach every week. Most people don't have on a mask at the beach. By the way, wear your masks, especially if you're indoors. Wear your mask when you go to the grocery store. When we're at the beach, we don't.
Especially around older people.
Especially around older people. And they, the governor shut down churches. He shut down gyms, hair salons. And I got people that own hair salons, and I got people that own gyms in my life, and I got people that, have small businesses, brick and mortar businesses. What to me this seems like is that there's an ideological view that they're making it seem like it's about safety and science. Again, my opinion. Somebody can maybe present a different position.
Yeah, dude, you and I are rappers.
Yeah, we're rappers. We're not scientists, right? So there's probably people way smarter than us. But what it seems like they're doing is they're saying, listen, we are on the side of science and safety. You need to give up some of your rights in exchange for safety and science. Yeah. And I get that. But when I look at this chart, I go, wait a minute. This seems like this is worse than the flu, but we're not talking about a 3% mortality rate or a 2% mortality. We're still looking at a under 1% mortality rate. And I don't know if you did the rate, factoring in all these numbers, what is the mortality rate currently with all of these numbers when you combine them all?
Yeah, I don't have that figure off the top of my head. I could do it pretty quick, but also I think even the increased testing that we're doing now, our own government is saying that we're likely 3 to 4 times high as many actual cases than are what being tested. So, that clearly I think we can probably agree that we were under biasing the cases at the beginning. We were probably missing, and that's probably why the rate looked so much higher. But even today, we're likely under testing, and especially if you factor in asymptomatic people, which there's still no consensus onto what percentage of total cases are asymptomatic. But if you're asymptomatic, why would you get a test? Why would you get somebody to shove a swab 3 feet up your nose,
Sure. Can you think you could do the quick math based on all these cases real quick for me and let us know, based on all of these cases in
based
the US, what is
cases
confirmed? So we're talking confirmed cases in the US in comparison to deaths. What is the confirmed cases?
You look at a fatality rate for all ages. It would be 1.6%.
And what is the flu? The average flu?
I think I don't have that off the top of my head, but I think it was actually closer to like 1/4 of 1% for the flu.
So the flu. I just tried to Google it right now. Mortality rate for the flu 2019. Let's see if we can get a quick number. gosh, why can't they just give me a number of what the diagnosis?
Yeah. You would hope that this would be one of the things that just Google just pops it up at the very beginning. But I mean, these things are all pretty nuanced,
So
issues.
so it says the flu globally is fewer than 1%. It's fewer than 1%.
Right. And that's factoring, they're factoring in the estimated realistic cases, not documented cases. So like if you were to take what they estimate to be the actual number of COVID cases, you're actually cutting that down to 0.5%.
Yeah. If we're saying, hey, let's just double that number, and let's just say there's a bunch of asymptomatic people, a bunch of people that never reported, a bunch of people that got some symptoms but stayed home, right? That is, yeah. I mean, you're talking about 0.5%.
Not saying that's not serious, because to have another flu on top of the flu is bad. But when you put that in perspective, and you put in perspective the toll of the economic consequences of the lockdown, you put that toll in perspective, all of a sudden it's like, okay, wow, maybe we're not going about this the correct way.
Yeah. And look, I don't know what the correct way, again, we're rappers. We are not scientists. It's just interesting that if we're talking about a 1% mortality rate or a 0.5% mortality rate, if you scale up according to what their projections are that people haven't been confirmed, that is still relatively low. It's really low. I'll pull the graphic back up where you talk about by age, right?
And this is, I mean, we're talking about, with all that, is that low if you're factoring people that are over the age of 80 years old. You know what I'm saying? So if you're talking about people that are under the age of 60, so you're taking that 0.5%, and let me just do some quick math. You're dividing. I mean, under 60, you're looking at, not even 0.1% of fatality. And if you're looking at people under 40,
it's even lower.
You're talking 1/100th of 1%, and that's factoring in people under 40 that have autoimmune issues, the other comorbidities that might place them at extreme risk. But people that are at extreme risk are going to continue to be at extreme risk from all the other things in this world. That's what puts them at extreme risk,
Right. So Dave Ramsey said this yesterday. I was watching a clip, and he basically said that it's like scientists and it's like scientists don't know math, right? Like it's like nobody's actually doing this. The fact that you had to put this chart together yourself, and that this information
ridiculous. It's ridiculous. I'm a rapper. I'm trying to search some basic information, and I had to make this. It's not hard.
Yeah.
A rapper can do it.
Yeah. I think you're right. And so here's my again, I seldom infer intent on stuff, but the only intent that I can infer on this, and maybe there's a bunch of different ones, right? And I don't mean to be like a conspiracy theorist, because I'm really not. Those of you guys that know me I'm not. But it seems like we're going to err and masquerade under the guise of science and saying, well, this thing is more viral than the flu. It's more problematic. Yes. Okay, okay, guys, we found out, because Mogli, the rapper, did a chart. And we found out that the death rate's not as bad. We didn't think to do this and give this information away to the public. And we found out the death rate's not as bad, but we're still going to err on the side of caution. And it almost seems like they're willfully willing to tank the economy on some, it's an election year. And like they're willing to do whatever they can to get Trump out. Now, you guys know I am not a fan of Trump. I think he's very divisive. I don't think he's very helpful. But goodness gracious, like really, like we're gonna push this thing to. But
it's not just pushing a narrative, because a narrative has consequences, and that's what because I don't really. I mean, like a narrative is a narrative, and people have been finding all types of, I think, illogical reasons to try to dunk Trump for a while. But like when these policies have consequences to the tune of like what they're projecting, these increase of deaths of despair, it's like, dude, that is significant. It's incredibly significant.
Right.
And unlike the virus, that's manufactured. That's artificial.
So Willa Brown said, still don't get why he is doing this. I'm assuming she's asking why Mogli is doing it. So Willa, we couldn't find this information. We and him were having a conversation about what is the actual death rate in comparison to the new cases. We couldn't get a clear answer on some of these things. So Mogli, who's very smart and learning to code, put together these charts that were not easily available, specifically for the new cases versus the current death rate, specifically for the death rate by age, right? These graphs are not floating around. They're not easily available. So he put it together, and in putting it together, it was like, wow, this is really interesting that we're taking such drastic precautions to do these lockdowns. California is under lockdown. San Diego is under lockdown. It seems like to potentially crash our own economy at the, for what? And increase these, what did you call them? These deaths of despair. These deaths of despair going up, and we're crashing the economy for what? For the sake of getting Trump out? What is the point? And again, not a fan of Trump. Don't think he's helpful. Don't think, I'm not voting for him. I've never voted for him. But guys,
and the crazy thing. So he had an interview that went on HBO last night, and I think I get what he was trying to say, but the incompetence of his ability to communicate even the most simple forms of data, it's just it certainly doesn't help. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
This is the leader of the free world. Oh no!
Yeah,
man.
It's unfortunate.
But,
it's unfortunate.
And Ruslan, I actually got to hop off in 4 minutes.